Describe your own personality in one word right now. Cheerful, moody, quick-tempered, calm, and you're reaching for a vocabulary invented by a Greek doctor 2,400 years ago to explain literal fluids sloshing around inside your body. For over 2,000 years, physicians on 3 continents believed your health, your mood, and your character were controlled by 4 substances inside you. And when you got sick, the fix was to cut you open and let one of them out. That sounds like a superstition. It wasn't. What it actually was, why it lasted longer than almost any medical idea in human history, and why you're still speaking its language without knowing it, is a stranger story than medieval people were dumb. Start with the moment this theory became possible in the first place, because before this, sickness wasn't a medical problem. It was a punishment. Around 400 BC, the Greek physician Hippocrates broke from that completely. Instead of blaming an angry god for a fever, he argued disease had a natural physical cause you could observe, track, and treat. That single move, natural causes instead of divine ones, is the same shift that separates every branch of modern medicine from faith healing. Hippocrates just didn't have germs or genetics to point to yet. He had 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The 4 humors weren't a myth invented out of nowhere. They were the first serious attempt in Western history to explain the body using logic instead of prayer. But a diagnosis without a system is just a guess. The man who turned Hippocrates' idea into an actual medical science was born 500 years later. His name was Galen, and between 129 and 216 AD, he built something closer to a unified theory of the human body than anyone had before him. Galen mapped each of the 4 humors to a quality. Blood was hot and wet, phlegm was cold and wet, yellow bile was hot and dry, black bile was cold and dry. Then tied those qualities to the 4 seasons, the 4 classical elements, and eventually to personality itself. It was a complete, internally consistent diagnostic framework. And once his writings were translated through Arabic and then Latin scholarship, it became the default operating system for Western medicine for roughly the next 1,300 years. Parts of it were still being taught to physicians in the 1800s. 1,300 years is longer than the gap between us and Charlemagne. No medical theory has come close to lasting that long. But here's the part that's actually surprised historians who went back and studied how doctors used this system in practice. It wasn't as rigid as 4 fluids, one size fits all makes it sound. Historian Noga Arikha, who earned her doctorate in history at London's Warburg Institute and later researched the subject at Columbia University, spent years tracing exactly how humoral medicine actually worked in practice for her book, Passions and Tempers. What she found is that humoral doctors treated every patient as having their own unique balance of the 4 fluids. Your baseline temperament wasn't the same as your neighbor's, so your treatment couldn't be either. That forced physicians to actually examine each patient individually: pulse, skin color, urine, diet, even someone's characteristic mood, before deciding on treatment. Instead of applying one fixed protocol to everyone with the same symptom, strip away the wrong biology, and what's left underneath is something close to the founding impulse of personalized medicine. Get it wrong for the right reasons. And the words this system generated to describe those individuals' temperaments didn't just disappear when the medicine did. If you've ever called someone melancholic, you're speaking fluent humoral theory. Melancholic comes directly from the Greek melos, meaning black, and chol, meaning bile. It's not a metaphor. It originally meant suffering from too much black bile. Sanguine comes from sanguis, Latin for blood. Choleric from yellow bile. Phlegmatic from phlegm, and the treatment that matched the diagnosis was bloodletting, deliberately draining a patient's blood, sometimes repeatedly, to rebalance the humors. It wasn't a fringe practice, it was mainstream medicine, practiced by trained physicians for centuries, Which brings us to how thoroughly this theory could still kill you, even after most of the science underneath it had already collapsed. By the 1500s, anatomists led by Andreas Vesalius were already dissecting bodies and finding real physical errors in Galen's centuries-old descriptions. The system was under serious scholarly challenge more than 200 years ago, before it actually died out in practice. Bloodletting hung on anyway, because trained, respected doctors kept using it. On December 14th, 1799, George Washington woke up with a severe throat infection. His physicians, led by Dr. James Craig, responded the way Galen would have, drained the excess. Over about 12 hours, they took roughly 80 ounces of his blood, close to 40% of his entire blood volume. One of the attending doctors, Elisha Cullen Dick, argued to stop, warning the bleeding itself could kill him. He was overruled. Washington died that evening. That's not an ancient Greek making his best guess with the tools available. That's the first president of the United States dying in the final year of the 18th century, treated by the standards of a 2,000-year-old theory that modern anatomy had already disproven. The medicine died slowly after that, replaced piece by germ theory and modern anatomy through the 1800s. But the words never got the memo. You still describe someone as in a good humor or bad humor. You call an angry person bilious and a calm one phlegmatic, without thinking twice. In the 20th century, the psychologist Hans Eysenck built one of modern psychology's foundational personality models directly on top of Hippocrates' 4 temperaments, mapping sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic onto measurable psychological traits, still referenced in nobody in personality research today. So ask yourself, what field are we confident about right now that's actually running on a starting assumption nobody has seriously questioned in a few hundred years? The four humors weren't a failure of intelligence. They were a genuinely rational system, built by careful observation, that happened to be wrong about the one thing everybody else depended on. We didn't outgrow superstition when we stopped believing in bile. We just found a new theory, confident enough to bleed a president to death in its name.